Hello, I'm Polly Myers. You probably have already read or heard a lot about me, but I'm going to give you a quick rundown on my life for those who don't know me, so you'll know why I'm qualified to help you recover from anxiety. For 40 years, I suffered and was disabled from anxiety and panic attacks. I tried every imaginable treatment for anxiety over those years. During that time, my husband became a doctor. Fortunately for me and for all of you, he chose to treat internal disorders in a natural way, listening closely to what his patients' bodies were telling them that it needed. I often was the guinea pig in our quest to find answers for me, for our son Josh, who also suffered from anxiety, and also Dr. Myers' many patients who suffered from anxiety, panic attacks, and related depression. In 1996, after 16 years of taking ideas from this study and that study and testing things on me to see what really worked, we came upon a huge piece of the anxiety puzzle that gave me my life back. Actually, it was many tiny pieces which formed a cohesive, powerful protocol for recovery. Since then, we have helped hundreds and hundreds of his patients live comfortable and happy lives. In this program, we are going to give you some nuts and bolts information which will help you understand what is happening to you, why you have anxiety, and then how to set up a plan for your recovery. If you have friends or loved ones that don't understand why you act and feel as you do, this series of audios will help them too. So now I'm going to introduce you to two of my favorite men, my husband, Dr. Ron Myers, and my son, Josh Myers. If you read my story on the website, you already know Dr. Myers is an expert in treating anxiety, panic attacks, and related depression. For the last 30 years, he has been treating internal disorders by bolstering the body's own healing ability with an emphasis on diet, exercise, and nutrition. You may recognize his name because he's probably taught at least 500,000 people how to live a healthier life. We've been a couple since I was 16 years old. I've really put him through the ringer, though, with my anxiety disorder. He's been by my side through all the ups and downs, but he's also been there for the joy and benefits of my recovery. My son Josh is an amazing man. If you have read Josh's story, you know that I gifted him, and we're going to talk about that later, with anxiety disorder. After nearly dying in his early 20s from the symptoms of anxiety and depression, he too recovered, got a psychology degree, has married, has children, and has dedicated his life to helping others recover and enjoy wonderful lives. So let's get started with the first big question. Do I or someone I love have an anxiety disorder? Josh, let's start with you. I know you're well-versed in the symptoms of anxiety disorder. Please tell us how you know when someone is suffering from anxiety. What do they say to you, and what are their symptoms?
Well, in my own personal case, it was pretty obvious. I was lucky enough, if you want to call it that, to be born into a family that had anxiety disorder running through it for generations. And so I was lucky enough when it happened, my first panic attack at about 5 years of age. I had people around me who knew at least what I was going through and could give me some language to explain it. For me, it was incredibly obvious. I'm shaking violently. I'm throwing up. This is something that is pretty hard to miss. And it would also go away about just as quickly. It would start quickly and end quickly. And there's a group of people that are sort of like that anxiety has hit them really, really hard. Most of the time when it happens to an adult, they head straight to an emergency room. These symptoms are strong enough to make you feel as though you're dying. I hear that all the time. And trust me, every single day, people who walk into an emergency room with these symptoms are seen by doctors. Doctors absolutely know this one. And, of course, they've got to run through the tests and all that, but you're likely to leave with a basic explanation that, hey, this is just anxiety, this is all in your head, and maybe they'll give you some medicine that'll help calm it down. That medicine will work. Usually they'll give you a benzodiazepine of some kind, like Xanax or Ativan or Klonopin, and you're left with this crazy diagnosis, that I've got anxiety. It's just anxiety. Man, that felt intense. I felt like I was dying. How do I know this is not going to happen again. And people come to me with just many, many, many questions. And so for those people, I say, hey, look, extremely common. About 1 out of 10 people in America will experience the symptoms they've experienced. And look, these doctors know what they're talking about, and these medicines don't work on other disorders. If you were having a heart attack and you try to take some Xanax to control it, that would be silly. That wouldn't help at all. And so that's one group of people that I see. The other group of people I see are people who've been to the doctors many, many times. They probably feel a little guilty about how many times they've gone to their own doctor. They've had this symptom and that symptom, and it literally can be just about anything. And they've tried this and that and this and that and test after test after test. And the doctor started to say, hey, this might just be anxiety. And they feel like, well, that's a psychological disorder. The symptoms that I have are extremely physical. Why on earth would my mind be able to create such real physical symptoms? And that's a whole other discussion to have, and questions I hope to answer later. But that's the other group I see, people who finally someone has said, you probably should look in this direction, after they really feel they've exhausted all of the standard sort of physical, medical explanations.
I know when I was growing up, there wasn't even a name. I don't know if even they use the word anxiety. They put people in institutions. I had nothing. I remember I had a panic attack for 2 weeks solid. And I can just see myself standing in the kitchen. I hadn't eaten. I had hardly slept for a couple of weeks. My weight was in the 90s. I had one child and a husband to take care of. I couldn't walk out the front door. I couldn't cross the street. I mean, I'm talking about 50 feet. I wanted to go see a house that was being constructed across the street, and I could not make myself get out that front door. I was sure that I just couldn't do it. And I stood in the kitchen, and I can see the window, and I can see the cabinets, and I can see the floor. I can see everything to this day, and I just was praying that I would just pass out and someone would take me away and take care of me. And I was willing at that time to give up everything. And it wasn't until my aunt, who had a similar problem, brought me a book. And there was a name. It was the first time Clara Weeks wrote this book, and she called it Agoraphobia. And I mean, just the fact that it had a name for the first time. And Josh, I actually have people that call me on the phone that are still at that stage. They really don't know what it is. People have called them hypochondriacs. As you said, they say it's all in your head. I could strangle people who say it's all in their head. What are you supposed to do with something like that? So I still see, do you see people like that who just have no clue what is absolutely happening to them?
Usually by the time they've found me, that's just a filter that I get, that they've found my website, they've gone through the Breakthrough program.
You work with a psychiatrist, too, who refers you patients.
Oftentimes, the funny thing about anxiety disorder is that it's extremely fixable. Anybody who's listening today needs to understand right off the bat that in the psychological field, one beautiful thing about this disorder is it's completely fixable. There are disorders out there that we don't know how to fix yet. This just happens to be one that I think we now completely can fix. Everyone who has this.
Well,
given time.
I would think that, I'm going to butt in because if I was going to a standard doctor, they probably wouldn't be able to answer. No one ever could answer for me anyway, what we do. So I think unless you get all the pieces, you can't completely.
And it's weird for me to say this, but having gone through this myself, it was the Breakthrough program that was that last piece.
Yeah, for me too.
The medical doctor understands the biochemistry pretty well. The Breakthrough program takes it to that last step where you really finally come to a full understanding about what's going on. And so with what we know in the psychological field, the psychiatric field, and with the Breakthrough program, there is every tool available to anyone who wants to completely recover.
What I found for me was that, as I told you, I tried everything: hypnotherapy, tapping therapy, eye movement therapy, drug therapy, cognitive therapy. I went through TERAP. We got the Attacking Anxiety program. We did a lot of things. I mean, I have a whole list of the things I tried. What I found was when I did the nutritional pieces that we developed, then everything started working.
Yeah.
Everything started working. It was as if I laid this calming and healing base, and then I could work on the anxiety. I could sleep again. I could, I went from an 8, 9, or a 10 down to maybe a 3 or a 4, where you can actually process what people are telling you. Before, it was almost impossible to even process those things because I was in such a state of anxiety. Just getting to those people. Yeah, for me was so difficult.
I feel like I get to kind of cheat. When I work with my clients, I have a lot of the same tools that other psychologists have. However, we get to work with a break-free program. And when they get their nutrition right, when they get the concepts that are contained in the break-free program put into their life, practicing becomes easy. When I go through the work with people of undoing whatever it is that they have kind of let themselves believe, which is I can't go into the grocery store, I can't drive in a car with another person, I could never fly on an airplane to go visit my family, I could never go back to Disneyland. All of those things start looking really doable, and it's fast. It's weeks, not months or years. And we start seeing these changes, and it makes my job really, really rewarding and exciting.
I remember the first time. One of the things I wanted to do was fly, and I kept practicing. And the first time I flew from California to Hawaii, I remember, practically every minute ticking by, and checking to see who's in the bathroom, where's the sick stack, is everybody around me that's, that it's okay that nobody can see that I'm shaking, I've taken my Xanax, and, so the first time I went across was like 5.5 hours flight, and I'm watching everything. And I'll never forget the time that I flew, and I sat down in my seat and I went, oh my gosh, I have 5.5 hours with nothing to do. This is heaven. There's a movie on. They're going to feed me. And it was a vacation. The flight was a vacation. That was such a different feeling than I'd felt before.
Yeah, for me, driving in a car with somebody I didn't know was frightening.
Oh, me too.
The idea that I would have a panic attack and that someone next to me would have to kind of go through this with me, and it would be embarrassment. And what I found with anxiety disorders is they're not connected to your personality. We have introverts that have anxiety. We have extroverts that have anxiety. And for me, I'm an extrovert. And I love talking to people. I love sharing with people. And so now all the time I drive around with people, and I'm just like, wow, this is so nice. I have a conversation I can have. The time flies by. I feel really kind of rebuilt at sort of a soul level, that my interaction with people is so critical for me. And I went a couple decades without having that in my life. That just seemed like the most frightening thing in the world, the most draining thing in the world. And like you were talking about with your flight, that switched for me to something that was the most rewarding thing, the most comforting thing.
It's amazing. I hated restaurants. I just hated restaurants. I just wanted to gag every time I would be forced to walk in the door, and I'd order soup so I could just eat the broth, and that's, so people wouldn't notice that I wasn't eating a meal. And today, oh my gosh, I just would rather go out to a restaurant and cook all the meals that I have. I mean, and unfortunately, I've gotten a little chubbier, but
me too. I understand.
Yeah, putting on the weight because it's so much fun to go out and taste all these foods and all these cultures and all these different things. Back to the question. I know we've diverted here.
It's fine.
There are some places people can look up and take tests. Like there's a standard test on the ADAA.org website, which will list a lot of different symptoms, and you can see that you're actually that you actually have anxiety disorder. I know that there's one with Attacking Anxiety website. They have you can take a test there. Lots of people have places where you can take a test to see if you actually have anxiety. Now, I'm going to talk to Dr. Myers. Dr. Myers many of us are these huge worriers and what-if thinkers, and it's really hard to believe that we could feel so terrible and have it just be anxiety. I want to know, how do you know it's not a heart attack or some other terrible disease?
Yeah, hi Polly, hi Josh. Thanks so much for letting me work with you in these classes. I just got to digress just a second here. We don't talk about you two's recovery, every day, but it brings tears to my eyes when I remember what it was like to watch you suffer, both of you. As a doctor, it's so frustrating for me, and it just gives me great joy to listen to and to be reminded about stuff, because I just, you guys don't struggle anymore, and now I expect you to have these normal lives, but it wasn't always like that, was it? So, in any case, it's always a dilemma as a physician, and I want to qualify. Josh mentioned the heart attack symptoms, and the truth of the matter is, after treating virtually tens of thousands of anxiety patients now, I can reassure you that many of the side effects of the biochemistry of chronic stress will cause heart attack-like symptoms, racing heart, fast pulse, nausea, sweating, and of course that sense of being totally out of control and scared, which drives people to the hospital waiting room. And I have to say, for everybody who's listening, we would never want you to take anything we say today to discourage you. If you think you're having a heart attack, I want you at the emergency room because you might be having a heart attack. What we're trying to point out here is that if you go through the learning curve and understand in the concepts of the Break Free program, the educational portion that will explain to you the biochemistry of what's going on, you'll be in a much better position to differentiate and reassure yourself that you're probably not having a heart attack. But when in doubt, go to the ER. I had a story just this last couple of weeks that kind of exemplifies why it's so important for us to educate people as to how severe these symptoms can feel when, in fact, they're not at all life-threatening. It's very difficult to convince somebody of that in the moment. For reasons that I won't bore everybody with here, I had to switch the person that was cutting my hair just recently, and this new lady that I found does a wonderful job. The first time I saw her on a Monday morning, I'm sitting there and we're kibitzing back and forth, talking about the weather and the things that people talk about when they're getting their hair cut. And she said, "Well, Dr. Myers, how was your weekend?" And I said, "Well, yeah, blah, blah, blah." "Well, how was your weekend?" She said, "Well, it was terrible." She said, I spent the whole weekend in the hospital. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. What happened?" And she, started telling me, and literally 2 minutes into her story, I knew exactly, what she was going to tell me. Long and short of it is, she started having chest pain, nausea. She was actually throwing up. She had, fast pulse, all the things. So she jumped in her car. And this is a single mom now who cuts hair for a living. No child support, no money from her spouse, and she, out of fear, goes to the ER, and she goes to our local ER, which I have great faith in. It's a wonderful emergency room, and was there from the middle of Saturday to the middle of Sunday. Ran up a bill of $25,000 in diagnostic. In diagnosing, and just like Josh mentioned, at the end of all this, the doctor comes in and she says, "Well, Mrs. Smith, I've got good news. You're not having a heart attack, and here's some medication that should make you feel better." So the doctor figured out what it was. But here's this lady, $25,000 later. She's just like most of us. She has credit card debt and can barely pay the bills. And the long and short of it is now she's going to have to probably sell her house or refinance or lose her house because of this bill, and it just broke my heart because I knew exactly what was going on with her. So I've worked with her since and tried to coach her and to get her started on the Break Free program. But that all could have been avoided if she had understood the concepts that we're going to be talking about in this class.
Yeah, I know we all spent an awful lot of money trying to figure out what was wrong. And for myself, I also made up excuses. I went to a gastroenterologist one time when I was a child. My parents took me, and I'm thinking I have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, because I'd had these violent bouts of diarrhea. And so I went through all of the gastrointestinal tests and, the barium enemas and all that kind of stuff. Thank goodness for me, they didn't put me on any drugs. But I know, and I wanted to be, I think this is what's really important. I wanted to have an excuse for why I felt the way I did, because anxiety wasn't a good enough excuse. I wanted to have them say, here's what you have, and here's what you take, or here's what we cut out, or here's what we do, and then you're going to be well. I wanted that answer, but that wasn't the way it was. Josh, did you have that too?
Everybody does. Man, I can't think of a single client that wouldn't rather have a physical ailment. I remember a client in particular who was terrified that this was multiple sclerosis, I believe was what the issue was. We get that a lot. It's funny. We're worried that it's going to be something big and real, but we would rather, at the same time, it be something physical, tangible. And I get kind of upset at this concept. To me, it is a physical symptom. It is a real physical disorder. When you look at this side by side with something like asthma, we both have acute attacks. They both can be treated with medication. They both can be treated with other day-to-day changes that can make a difference. But for some strange reason in our society, we say, oh, you have asthma. That's fine. No one should feel guilty about that. That's just something you're born with. But when you're born with anxiety disorder, and it comes on in your life sometimes, we feel this tremendous shame, guilt, all these things. And boy, it would seem so much easier to have some kind of real physical disorder. So, yeah, I get it. I have had it. I think every single one of my patients would prefer this as something physical. They can take a pill. They can tell their friends rather than try to explain to themselves and to other people what actually is going on.
Yeah, it doesn't show like a cut or cancer, or MS or any of those things. And we're going to go through a segment later on in this series that talks about how other people respond to you, your husband, your spouse, your friends, the people who love you, and hope that we can help them understand what's happening, because when you can't see an illness, it just doesn't feel like it has credibility. And so a partner is saying, go to work, do this, do that. I want to go to Hawaii. Why can't you go to dinner with me? You can't get to the grocery store. What's wrong with you? And wives tend to say, oh my gosh, you don't have a heart attack. Why are you doing this? You can't breathe. Your throat's closing up. Why are you acting like such a big baby? And people need to understand that this is real. This is a real problem. And
if I could interject,
yeah,
you're so right. I guess I should say here on the outset that thank goodness this is not a problem that I've ever had. I've never had a panic attack. I suffer with stress like everybody, but I've never gone through anything close to what Polly and Josh have gone through, which is probably one of the reasons that I've come to admire this group so much. I don't think I would have had the character, frankly, to have coped with this like Polly and Josh did, and like I see my patients today. These are incredibly brave people, and these symptoms, believe me, I want to clarify. Believe me, the symptoms that you're feeling, that the reflux, irritable bowel, difficulty catching your breath, lack of mental focus and concentration, that's not in your head. That comes from the biochemistry. We'll be talking a lot about this in this class because it's so important. It's one of the insights in the Breakthrough program that you won't hear about anyplace else. That is the biochemistry of what's going on and how that generates and how we control it. But that bad biochemistry is very, very real, and it causes side effects that are very, very real. But it's not the stress or the anxiety that's causing those symptoms. It's the biochemistry in your body that's causing those symptoms. And once you learn to control that bad biochemistry, and that's something that the Breakthrough program can teach you to do very quickly, as Josh mentioned, your ability to not react to that stress the way in those anxious moments the way you have in the past will give you back control of your life.
Yeah, to dovetail into that, a lot of people who I start working with think that they're weak. They basically think that they're having to come to me out of a position of weakness. And I think that if anybody believes that, they need to go through this personally And
yeah, wouldn't you love it if everybody could have one of these once in a while?
I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
No, I wouldn't.
But I have seen that before, where people have been very unkind about this until they had one themselves. And trust me, they will never be unkind to anybody who says they have anxiety ever again.
Yeah.
It's an extremely... Yeah, it's a unique experience. But anybody who's listening to this call from the position of the person who has the disorder, trust me, it isn't weakness. Just getting to this point in your life, you have developed a strength that will serve you very well later in life, especially when we kind of remove this extraordinary ball and chain called anxiety disorder. And it's not that far away, the opportunity to see what it's like on the other side. And so know that there's strength there, extreme strength there, and know that when that ball and chain gets cut, man, life becomes just unlimited.
You know, guys, I want to back up a little bit and talk about the anxiety scale we use, running from 1 to 10 to talk about anxiety symptoms. 1 meaning you have no anxiety, and 10 being, I think I might die, or if you've had several anxiety panic attacks at this level, you just want to get out of the pain and you probably wish you would die. Before, we've been talking about people in the 7, 8, 9, 10 category, and maybe sometimes in the 6 category. This is where anxiety plays a big part in your decisions and maybe disrupts every day. It plays a big part in who you choose to have around you and what job you have or don't have, what you can and can't do. So let's talk about those people who fit into the scale with anxiety running between 2 and 6. This type of anxiety is called generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. These people can still go to work, go to school, marry, go to the grocery store. Maybe have a few things they don't feel they can do, but they still function in most parts of their lives. Their anxiety just sits around most days. It has high and low levels, but never or rarely tips into a panic attack. Josh, got some input on this?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
These people are just as significant.
Hey, lucky me, I've experienced, all of the above.
Me too.
I've experienced all the way from, the 10, to the days and months and years where maybe I was between a 2 and a 5. And this is particularly destructive. This is kind of a sneaky one. It's not quite enough necessarily to feel that you're compelled to do something about it, like a panic attack, but this can have devastating impacts on your life. What this feels like is that there's always something wrong. There's always something that you can't quite put your finger on. There's something that maybe bad that's about to happen. You don't know what it is, but you have this anxiety. You're always trying to find a reason why that's just hanging over your life. Once you understand the biochemistry of it, it makes perfect sense. It's very fixable. But the effects of it can be pretty devastating. You definitely can, over the years, hold your life back. The relationships you choose to have, the jobs you choose to have, all the experiences can be completely diminished. And these are years of your life that are going away that you're never going to get back. There's also a disassociative effect that we've mentioned at times that can start showing up with this, where you start feeling a little not quite in your body, and this can be really disturbing. Just because you're not having this huge flood of adrenaline and you're going into this 8, 9, and 10 land, that does not mean this can't have a huge impact on your life. And especially if this goes untreated over time, the probability of you developing depression grows and grows and grows. And so, it may not have that kind of intensity of a panic attack, but somebody who's been for maybe years struggling with this kind of low-level anxiety, their depression has likely shown up. They kind of have this intermittent feeling of not being particularly grounded or in their body. If you haven't experienced this, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's a little bit of a surreal feeling, somewhat like you're watching the movie called Your Life rather than you're actually in your life experiencing it. And so through the Break Free program, you can understand exactly how to intervene with this. And I encourage everyone who thinks that maybe it's not worth the effort. No, it absolutely is worth the effort. You're not even coming close to your life potential, and it's very fixable in a pretty short period of time.
Dr. Myers, I think you probably have seen people. Well, actually, when you take a case history, before they tip over, before they go into full-blown panic attacks and, high anxiety, have you heard them say, I just had this feeling, what do you see with your patients?
Well, because generally by the time they get to me, they have had full-blown panic attacks, which have created internal disorders, which is why they're coming to see me for the most part. And so, most of mine are up on, that, six and above. But there's no question that it's absolutely critical to address those symptoms, six and down, because as Josh was mentioning, it dramatically limits your life. And the good news is that the lower down that scale you are, the more likely it is that you can get back control, fairly quickly.
Yeah, I see a lot of people that lived at this level for a long time, and then they tipped over. I was talking to my mother the other day. I tipped over at 7 because of a huge trauma, but she told me, which I didn't know, that, I didn't want to go to school when I was in kindergarten. I was running this, the little bit of stomach ache. I was a happy kid. I ate all the time. I was a big kid, athletic, doing everything. But there was still this, I don't want to, there was this little low-lying gnawing, and I see people who have that, and they don't correct it. And so when something big comes along, then they tip over. Then it's too much. Josh, anything that you have to add on that? I don't hear you on the phone.
Sorry, that would be me not unmuting myself. So, yes, intervene as soon as possible. If you're somebody who's come to this phone call, chances are you've experienced an 8, 9, or 10. If you know somebody who's been kind of living with low-level anxiety, or if you're fortunate enough to be somebody who's kind of lived down in that level, intervene now. Trust me, it's worth it. Don't wait until this gets any worse. Intervene now.
In a future audio, we're going to be talking about the physical damage that it controls in the long run, and one of the reasons why you should be fixing it now. And physical damage takes place even at this low level when you're running 2, 3, 4, 5, and leads up to some major illnesses. So we want to take you very seriously, just like we do with people that are in the 7, 8, 9, 10 category. Dr. Myers, did we lose him too?
No, I'm here, Polly. Is there a question?
Well, I think that's kind of the people that you see. Their job is stressful. They're just living on this low level anxiety, and it bumps up a little bit. But they could go to Europe if somebody said they could go to Europe. They can go to dinner. They can do. But there's this low lying level of anxiety that's kind of an undercurrent all the time.
No, it's there, and oftentimes they're not really even aware of it. They just think this is the way life is. But I have to concur with everything I've been hearing you guys say. The reality is that it needs to be identified, needs to be addressed, because it's a whole lot easier to address it at this level than at a higher level, no question. Yeah,
and the things that we're going to be talking about are just the same for you. So we will be talking about that in the future too. Okay, everybody, this is about the end of the session. At this point, most of you listening probably have a good idea if you or a loved one has an anxiety disorder. All of us with anxiety seem to feel we are different, that we're alone, and we hate to ask some of the crazy questions going on around in our mind. In the next section, Section 2, we're going to talk about some of the most often asked questions and fears people have asked us. So this ought to be interesting. Goodbye, Dr. Myers and Josh. We'll talk later.
Bye, guys. Bye.